Our next guest is a Fox Sports Radio legal analyst, does a tremendous job on our network and others. We are pleased to have Amy Dash joining the Odd Couple. Amy, how are you?
What's up,
I'm
Amy?
great. Wow, thank you guys so much for having me on. I love this show. I'm so thrilled to be talking to you guys.
Thank you so much.
We really appreciate that. And let's get to it. We watched the Tony Busby, that's the lawyer who's representing most of the plaintiffs against Deshaun Watson. And he had a press conference today where he talked about the cases. And you put out a tweet that really rocked me because to me it took this thing, which already looks bad, to a whole nother level. I'm going to read your tweet and then you can kind of respond and expand on it.
Sure.
This is from you. My reading of the Busby presser is that they are basically discreetly accusing Deshaun Watson of trafficking women, locally and nationally, a state and federal crime if true. Would not surprise me if Busby was cooperating with the feds. I mean, that puts a whole nother degree of seriousness on this, it feels like.
And let me say this, Amy, real quick before you respond. After you respond, can you explain for people who don't understand what trafficking is, and what it entails for you to break the law? Because a lot of people think you'd have to be bringing somebody in from some other country or they have to be underage or something like that. Can you explain that after you give your thoughts?
Just wanted to say that obviously Deshaun Watson is innocent until proven guilty.
No doubt.
So whatever he's accused of and however compelling the people who spoke today may have been, it's important to keep that in mind. But you're absolutely right. I thought that this was definitely Busby hinting at the possibility that Watson was allegedly sex trafficking women for a couple of reasons, and then I'll break down the law. But, first of all, the most obvious being that he had a human sex trafficking expert and survivor there who made a pretty powerful speech. There would be no reason to have a woman there talking about that, unless it was relevant to the case. And also, he just emphasized certain things, like, for example, there's an allegation that Deshaun Watson had flown a woman in from Atlanta, that he had Ubered her somewhere. So that's, transporting. But he had really, really hammered home when he was talking about that during the press conference. Listen to what I'm saying, listen to, this is really important. And all throughout the complaints, there is this pattern of keywords that as a lawyer, if you're sort of putting the pieces together, it would become obvious to you that they're building some sort of a case or at least cooperating towards some sort of a case like this. Force, coercion, that the victims were allegedly fearful, that they were paralyzed by fear. One of them, they said, was locked in a room and couldn't get out. Some of them, they said, were threatened. One was allegedly threatened that her reputation or her career could be messed with. But just to make it clear for everybody, because you make a great point, I mean, a lot of times you think that with the trafficking women, it's like bringing them in cattle cars or something and prostituting young women against their will. But actually trafficking, first of all, doesn't require any movement. It could be a domestic or a local act. It could be with adults. And it really just requires at its most basic, just the recruiting. It could be the transporting, but recruiting would suffice. Just recruiting people using force or coercion to do so. And then the underlying purpose for that recruitment is to have them perform a sexual act or for sexual exploitation. So in this context where you have a domestic situation where there's a worker who's being paid for something, and they believe that they're going into the situation to be paid for the professional act that they, want to conduct, and instead they are forced or coerced. I'm not saying this happened, but this is the scenario. They're forced or coerced into performing a sexual act and then being paid for that act instead of the act that they thought they were going to perform. Well, that's basically forced prostitution, and that would fall under the category of human trafficking.
And the other part that I wanted to ask is the idea that they haven't tried to settle, or like this case just seems to have gone like from 0 to 50 in a second. Is there any possibility of this when you get to this point, or no, that they could start writing checks for this to try to go away, or is the cat out of the bag, Amy?
Well, there's always a possibility they can try to settle, but it just seems from what Busby is saying that he's really taking this everywhere possible. I have no doubt he's cooperating with the NFL, and he's already said that they would be cooperating. But he's also mentioned talking to other investigative authorities outside of Houston PD. And there would really be no other investigative authorities that would be relevant to a state crime such as like an indecent assault or sexual assault unless you're talking to federal authorities. Now, there are a bunch of women who are from other states, Georgia. Some of them one was from Arizona, one from California, and they are accusing of the same thing. So if, in fact, the ultimate goal here is to say, listen, there are 50 women, the patterns are all the same, where there's a person who's allegedly contacting people on social media, under the guise of, I'd like a massage, transporting them or recruiting them to a location, and then coercing or forcing them to do a sexual act instead and paying them for that. Well, then potentially you're talking about a national trafficking case where the feds would have jurisdiction. So those are the only other investigative authorities I could think of who he would be going to outside of Houston PD.
Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't remember a lot of cases where it's being played out this much in the public sphere. Like the lawyer bringing your defense, they're not in court. They're making statements publicly. Am I wrong on that, or does it seem like they're really trying to play this out in the court of public opinion long before you get to a courtroom?
I think they are, and I think it's because, Busby said, we tried to settle. The woman who spoke today, initially, the rumor is that Busby had asked for $100,000 on her behalf. He says that their settlement attempts were made in order to avoid having to put her through the public scrutiny.
Right.
So he's saying we didn't want to go this route. But we were forced to because we were met with this arrogance from Deshaun Watson's attorney and lawyer who wouldn't settle the case. And then once it got into the public domain, all these other women started coming forward. And I think, Busby's really on the defensive, and that's why they had to have this presser today to show the faces and the names of the alleged victims, that these are real people, and sort of push back against all of the claims that this is just for publicity or just for fame and that it's not real.
How about, Amy, this case reminds Chris and I both of the Bill Cosby situation. Like, one woman says, this is what happened to me. Other women at home watching TV, and they say, you know what, that happened to me as well. And before you know it, it's 60 women, and Bill Cosby's in jail. Does it feel like that to you, or no?
It does in a sense, because there's a really similar pattern alleged in most of the cases.
Right.
But I think it's important to remember a lot of the cases, allege that he touched women with his genitals, and that's as far as it went. There are a couple of cases where there's allegations of forced oral sex or forcible touching, and those are more serious. The woman who spoke today, her complaint is that there was an indecent assault. Now, technically, that's just a misdemeanor. So he might, even if she filed a criminal complaint, even if that went to trial or whatever, he could try to plea on that and just get probation. But Busby is saying that there was at least one other woman who has filed a criminal complaint and more to come. So I think it becomes in the Cosby realm if you have one of the women who alleged forcible oral sex, which is a felony. If she files a criminal complaint, then it becomes in the Cosby realm.
Okay. Thank you for clearing
Amy,
that up.
what would if you were representing Deshaun at this point, Rusty Hardin, of course, is his counsel, what would your strategy be at this point after you've seen all that's happened?
It's really tough. I mean, I've seen what his strategy is to date. So, they're saying blackmail, they're saying consent, they're attacking the attorney. I think it's just the strategy here would be if there is any type of a criminal charge from the prosecutor, you plead that out right away. Because, like I said, some of these are just misdemeanors. And even on the felony, it just depends on how much supporting evidence there is. I do think there is a weakness in terms of evidence to Tony Busby's cases. He did talk about the evidence that he was going to make public today. And if that's all the evidence that he has, some direct messages or, evidence of non-disclosure agreements, I mean, is that a little bit out of the ordinary? Yes. But I don't think that the evidence I've seen to date would be strong enough to corroborate that definitely something happened. So it really becomes a he said, she said.
But Amy, let me ask you, but there have been cases where people have gone to prison for life, no body found, no gun, circumstantial. Is the burden of proof higher here?
Unfortunately, you're talking about people who don't have a lot of money. That's who that usually happens to.
But he's
got a lot of money, so I don't. But it's horrible that our system's that way. But a lot of
but that's fair. But you know what I'm saying. I've seen people go to jail for that, where there's nobody.
Poor people. Yeah.
Yes.
Right. And here, I'm not going to downplay it. If you have 22 character witnesses backing up one woman, if it goes the criminal route, yeah, that's really powerful. And as we saw today from the press conference, Tony Busby even attacked one of the women who came out and defended Deshaun Watson, who's a massage therapist, and said that he was a great guy. And he read a direct message from this woman that sounded pretty bad. The woman basically saying that she knows that he's been messing with people and she had warned him, and so that stuff is not good. It shows that there's really going to be an attacking of credibility on both sides of the aisle. But you're absolutely right. I mean, somebody could win on a he said, she said on a felony charge, and the person could go to prison for years.
Wow. Well, that's Amy.
Amy,
Dash,
thank you. Oh, my
legal
goodness
analyst
gracious.
for Fox Sports Radio. Excellent stuff,
I feel
Amy.
smarter
really
right now, and that's hard, Amy.
That's the
hard
point.
for
I'm
Rob
so
Parker.
glad.
You know it. It's hard. Oh, my God.
Great stuff. We'll talk to you in the future about this.
Yes, Amy. Thank you.
Sounds great. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks a lot.